feel when your numbers go up and they hear you. They start following your message cause they feel you. Haters in the rear view wanna ruin plans. Don't be startled, they just low-key fans. They tight like bands on the fresh stack. Knowing Rolo runs the city, bringing hip-hop back for the 51st year with my loquacious bands. Now this ain't no love.
Welcome back to the Rolo Runs the City podcast. I am your host, Rolo, and I'm here back for another week. And I just wanted to talk to you guys to talk about discipline. Obviously, you know this is one of our staples, one of our pillars of our show. But not only that, it's also a pillar of life. Without discipline, without consistency, you have nothing. So you always have to make sure that these things are in place. So today's show is talking about being built different, and of course the discipline behind the dream. And dreams are not achieved if you do not have discipline in place, because you must have follow through. Anybody who dabbles, jack of all trades, master of none, they don't get to where they want to get to because of the fact that they're not fully immersed into what needs to be done, and that's achieving their dream. So without further ado, we're definitely going to get to this episode. Like I always tell you guys all the time, feel free to check out my Instagram and Facebook at Rolo Runs the City Podcast, as well as Rolo Runs the City Music. Of course, don't forget RoloRunsTheCity.com. All things Rolo's right there. As well as on all the streaming platforms, you're either going to find Rolo Runs the City, you're going to find my music, or you're going to find my podcast. Either or is fine. Check it out. I am there. And of course, you guys that are watching me on YouTube today, you guys just go ahead and hit up the handle at Rolo Runs the City. I am here. And not to mention where I get very philosophical with my quotes. You can also check me out on X for some daily motivation. Anyway, without further ado, we know motivation fades, but discipline stays. And that's what we're talking about right now. We're talking about being built different, the discipline behind the dream. So, you always have to remember, legacies are built, with hidden work being done, silent reps. None of the rah-rah stuff that happens whenever you're in front of the crowd. They tell you all the time, you get celebrated in public for what you do in private. So, for instance, me, obviously, I'm a runner. I go out there and I run. And, of course, I haven't ran much since March. But, in fact, I haven't ran at all since March. Barring a couple of injuries that we're trying to make sure that we get situated. And not to mention, shout out to the physical therapist who did a little cupping on me yesterday. That had to get done, and I still got those marks. I guess they're going to be there for a couple of days, but that had to get done. But with that being said, knowing that I run, it takes a lot of work. You don't just show up to the start line. Although I've happened to do this a couple of times where I've showed up to the start line without the proper training, or training at all for that matter, and I've ran a couple of marathons like that. My first marathon I ran like that, and the last marathon that I ran in March I ran like that. But not everybody can do that, and I don't recommend anybody to do it either, because if I could do it all over again, I would put in the necessary reps to ensure that I get to that start line prepared. But with that being said, what I'm saying is that you have to make sure that you are putting in the work in private. Anybody who's successful on any sort of venture, endeavor, they always make sure that they put in the work prior to game time. Okay? I mean, game time is always live. We already know that. A day up is a day on. But owning your skills and totally immersing yourself into your craft is, I guess what you will say, will get you celebrated in public, but what you do in private is what actually counts. I remember Tom Brady saying when he played football, he said the game isn't won on Sundays. He said the game is won throughout the week. When you start practice Monday, Tuesday, all throughout the week leading up to the game. He said if we had a bad practice week, we damn sure we're going to show up to the game and more than likely lose. And he said majority of the time that occurred. So, with the winning ways that his teams displayed, obviously they did more winning than they did losing. They had successful preparation, and preparation is absolutely key. So always remember that when you're building your legacy, it takes those silent reps and the hidden work to actually show what you are about when the time comes and lights, camera, action, and you are ready to go. So you got to remember, man, there's no applause. It's just your routine, and you have to be purpose driven. At the end of the day, if you're out here doing your thing so you can seek validation and likes or views or whatever it is, and that's what's driving you, then you're not going to last long, because you can get to a point where maybe you may get 4 or 5 views on something, or you may just get 10 likes on something, and you're like, man, like, I'm really trying to immerse myself into this world, and this is what's driving me to try to, I guess you're seeking your validation and your success based on numbers. But the way I always looked at things are, if I had 5 or 6 people, like, say, like my Instagram post, or I have 1 or 2 people who like my Facebook page, I don't really get down on myself for not having these massive numbers. Let's just be honest with you. A lot of times people are inflating the numbers now, and I always talk about how the numbers don't lie, but for some reason they have found a way to manipulate numbers. But I notice for me, my objective is, if I'm able to reach 3 or 4 people, if I'm able to reach 10 people, or if I'm able to reach 2 people, and they resonate with my message, then my job is done. Because the whole deal about executing, being purpose driven, and establishing your routine is knowing that whatever you're doing in private, when it comes out to the public, whether if it's a crowd of 200 or if it's a crowd of 2, if it resonates well with somebody, you're bettering this earth. At the end of the day, that's just what it's all about. But I know for me, as well as I'm pretty sure that you guys, of course, can, really relate to this. But, you go through tough weeks, like for me, I try to stay on top of my training. It's been really difficult, obviously, because I haven't been able to do something that I'm not saying that I'm particularly like favorited to do, which is running, but I do it because I know what the other side looks like, and I do it because I've had the ability and the God-given gift to be on my 2 feet to get this done. I haven't been able to do that, but still, training just totally, it can take you out the game if you let it. You go through tough weeks. Putting together this podcast is not something that's easy. Obviously, anybody who's in the podcasting world, as in reference to production, as well as making sure your notes are right, even, marketing the product, everything that entails with what we do in podcasting is difficult. And things could be rough on that aspect as well. Trying to roll out some new music, getting ready to try to launch something next month. Lord willing, everything will work out well. That's another thing you have to do. You go through the creative process as well as marketing your own stuff, or you set up marketing teams to go ahead and push your stuff out. Back in the day, they used to have street teams, which would actually push out singles, mixtapes out in the street. Doesn't necessarily happen like that anymore, being the fact that we've been working off of the cloud for maybe like the past 10 years. So obviously CDs are obsolete, but you still get in contact with digital marketers in case if you don't do it yourself, and they're kind of your street team, so that's stuff that you do as well. And things could be absolutely difficult when you have all of these different aspects of life kind of coming at you at once. And of course, you got, the family that you have to deal with, or, anything outside of yourself that has to get situated. I mean, life can really, really hit you. So you got to be at a point where, that motivation is never going to just stay there and just keep you going. That's where discipline has to come in, because believe it or not, when you don't want to do it, you got to do it anyway. So that's always got to be the motto, man. You know, you don't want to do it, you got to do it anyway. And I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, or if I'm just basically talking about this a lot, but you have to understand this stuff is so important. A lot of people back in the day, I truly do remember, you would have so many people show up, and people would just have to show up and they would have to show out in order to, achieve the results that they wanted, or just anything in reference to, like, whether you're winning a contest, you're competing against folks, whatever it is, or even at the job, whether you're trying to get your production numbers high, depending on, what field you're in, you just had to really compete. Nowadays, it seems that discipline has faded so much into the background that now they're just celebrating people for even showing up, because nobody even wants to show up anymore. Like, it's just gotten to a point where nobody wants to show up anymore. So that's something that's it's very disheartening. You know what I mean? But most people quit when things get a little uncomfortable. And like we talked about, right now people are being celebrated for just getting to the start line. So not only are people avoiding being uncomfortable, but they're just operating out of the bed pretty much. You know what I mean? They're operating out of the bed. They just want to be comfortable. They don't even want to leave the house. So they're definitely taking themselves out of the game. They're not even spectating, watching the game. They said, the hell with watching the game. Like, I don't even want to go to the game. I'm not getting out of bed. So I think that's something that's really hurting today's society, is the fact that we're so recluse, as opposed to being out there and absolutely just enjoying what life has to offer. People have their opinions about why society has geared itself that way. A lot of people blame it on the pandemic. A lot of people are blaming it on social media and saying that, why leave the house when I got my phone and I can go everywhere on my phone? And in actuality, you're living in a fake world and at that point. So I think it's very imperative to ensure that you get out, touch some grass, smell the air, and get some sun. Get some vitamin D on that body, because at the end of the day, you're wondering why you're depressed. Now you know why you're depressed. You're lacking vitamin D. So I recommend that you get on top of your game. But anywho, that's just something that has to be taken into account, and to be built different, you got to push through the pain, man. We talk about this consistently. You have to push through the pain. If you want to be built different, you say, hey, I'm cut from a different cloth. Okay, well, what are you made of? And people who normally say that, they'll say that, or they'll say, other euphemisms like, hey, I'm the last of a dying breed. And it's like, okay, well, what kind of breed are you then? Show us who you are. How you do anything is how you do everything. So if you're somebody who's lacking at something, more than likely you're lacking at everything. So you have to be sure to be consistent and deliver on what you say. And what you say needs to be what you do. But anywho, but you always got to remember that motivation is like the spark. Discipline is the machine. So obviously, the machine doesn't require a consistent spark. It just needs to be sparked up. The machine starts going, and the machine goes on its own. So people have to remember that machine is built on the success of the spark. And the spark can be very successful once it's like, oh, the motivation's there. Bam. Okay, now let me get started. Because motivation is only going to take you but so far. Bam, just a spark. That's all it's going to take. And that's all it comes down to. Get your spark. Don't expect to run off of a spark, because that's not going to work. You have to have discipline. Discipline is the machine that makes sure that it carries you from point A to point B, all the way to point Z. So always keep that in mind. But anywho, when life hits you, you definitely have to stay disciplined. And the reason why I say that is because most people, they'll have, and they're all valid, by the way. Things happen. I mean, you talk about injury, you talk about, family, personal trials you go through, all valid excuses to not execute on something. It just happens. That is what it is, right? But I will tell you this: success accepts no excuse. It just is what it is. Success accepts no excuse. And the reason why I say that success doesn't accept any excuse, because no matter what, if you want to be winning in this lifetime, you're going to have to do the things that people are not willing to do. And trust me, right now, like I said, people are just being celebrated to getting to the start line. They haven't even run the race yet. They're just like, hey man, we're just glad you're here. We're glad you're not like the 99% who decide to stay in the bed. And mind you, these aren't one percenters that are showing up to the start line. These are just people that's like, oh, I'm just coming here to see what happens. They're trying to see what the result is going to be. But they're being celebrated just for showing up. And I remember back in the day, you would have to show up and you would have to show out, and then you were celebrated. But now it's kind of a different story. But that's just the way things are. So you always have to remember that. Success accepts no excuse. So when we could use all the excuses of saying, hey, I'm injured, I got some family issues, I got some personal things going on, like I said, things are all valid. But if you give yourself an out, you will always take it. And I think it was Tony Robbins that says a quote of, you want to take over the island, burn the boats. So basically what he's saying is like, you can't give yourself an easy way out. If you're not willing to put in the work and take out that island and do what needs to get done and take it over, then, go ahead and keep your boats on shore and make sure you can go back out to sea, because you're just not up for the task. But he's basically saying, you want to take over the island, burn the boats. Pretty much like, don't give yourself an excuse, do what you need to do, so then that way you can execute on whatever it is you want to do. But I actually do agree with that. And, another thing people always talk about as well is like with mental health. Mental health actually requires discipline, and consistency is the anchor. It really is. Because, with your mental health, people talk about that it requires a lot of discipline. And yes, it does require a lot of discipline. I will not discount that. I mean, people, to be in a funk, it requires you to just start moving. Okay? Because if not, you will stay in that funk, and God knows what can happen from there. So you want to make sure that in order for your mental health, you need to maintain your discipline, so then that way you can do what needs to get done. And like I said, consistency is the anchor, because no matter what, okay, if you're trying to pull that anchor out, you're going to have the hardest time. And the reason being is because the anchor is there for a reason. It's heavy, it's hard to move, and that's where your consistency needs to be. It needs to be heavy, it needs to be hard to move, so then that way your discipline can always stay intact. So always remember that. I'm not trying to talk like like I'm a boat captain, but it is what it is, man. Be anchored in what you're doing, and like I said, anchor your discipline down, so then that way you can get things done and achieve what needs to get done, okay? But at the end of the day, you have to build your purpose through routine. If you don't have a routine, if you don't have ways that are going to set you up for success, then you're not going to be successful, okay? Like, I'm very routine about what time I get up in the morning, what I do in the morning. Everything is about me that I try to ensure is that I'm systematic. And the reason why I do that is because this takes away... it doesn't take away, it actually adds. It adds to me not going through any stress in reference to stressing about little things, where a lot of people end up, they're lacking because of, oh, I got to think about what I got to wear in the morning. And then after that, I got to do this and I got to do that. And, oh, when am I going to eat this one? No, I eat the same thing every morning. I drink the same thing every morning. I set out my clothes the night before. I have my routine on how I address my son's needs, I address my wife's needs, do what I need to do, and just hit the ground running. That's exactly how I approach things. You could say it's boring, you could say it's predictable, but at the end of the day, you know what the result is. When you get up and you kind of just are all willy-nilly about it, then you no longer have control of the day has control of you. So that's something that you don't want to do. So you want to make sure that you build Your purpose has to be built through routine. You need a routine. If you do not have a routine, then you will always be lacking. Point blank, period. Okay. And you always have to think about this too. And I'm just going to break this down in the simplest terms. When you think about, dedicating an hour to something, whether if it's your body, whether if it's your mindset, whether even if your own personal brand, if you just dedicate an hour a day to those things, okay. And I don't mean collectively. I mean like take an hour to get a good workout in. Take a good hour to say, hey, I'm gonna work an hour on my dream and work on my brand and do what I need to do, so then that way I can propel myself forward. Or if you're like, I need to be in a situation, whether if you're listening to motivational content on YouTube or you're listening to podcasts like mine on any of the streaming services, or not even like mine, even if you don't want to listen to mine, that's okay. You can listen to somebody else. But the whole point is that you have to put yourself in an environment where you feel like you're growing as opposed to dying. Because when you stop growing, you die. It is what it is. You're not dying, you're dead. You stop growth, you're dead. Point blank, period. But you want to make sure that you're doing that. And, when you do these things over time and that compounds over time, that equals to you being indestructible, unstoppable. I mean, whatever adjective you want to go ahead and add, you can go ahead and do it. Because I'm telling you, this absolutely is imperative to ensure that you get yourself in the most optimal situation. Like I said, if you dedicate an hour a day to those certain things, your fitness, and not only, talking about like an hour in the gym. Hey, okay, if you want to go ahead and spend 30 minutes in the gym and you want to go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to meal prep this next half an hour for the next 2 or 3 days. And yes, you could do things fairly quickly now, being the fact that, you don't have to be slaving in the kitchen for so long anymore, just the way food is now. And of course, you want to go whole foods route, stay away from processed stuff. You guys already know. I'm not going to give you a nutrition class on this, but you know what needs to get done. But consistency sets the example, and never sacrifice your standards. And the reason why I say that consistency sets an example and you don't want to sacrifice your standards is because if you're consistently doing the right thing at a high level, your standards will continue to ascend. You don't want to descend with your standards. Think about it this way. If you're driving a car and you think that car is not going to stop, are you going to hop in that car? I don't think so. I don't think you're hopping in that car. You're like, dude, I know it has brakes, but I don't think the brakes work. I want to get to my destination safely. Or if you decide to catch a flight from here to Europe, or you're going to Dubai or wherever you're going. I mean, even if you're going to the next town over and it's a 15-minute flight, are you getting in that plane if you know that there isn't a complete certainty that you will land safely? You're not doing that, okay? One thing's for sure and two things for certain. We have to make sure that you stay consistent and you stay disciplined. Now, the consistency of how we travel is how we feel that certainty and we feel safe. Okay, and that's built through the discipline of, standard operating procedures of companies that run these entities, checks and balances, quality control. I mean, you guys already know this. And if you feel good about going into a plane and saying, I know we're going to get to our next destination safely, or if you're catching an Uber and, Lord willing, you don't have a crazy Uber driver, but you go into an Uber and and say, hey, I know I'm going to make it here safe because the guy's got brakes. For the most part, this woman has sense. I'm pretty sure we're going to get there safely. If you knew that there was a risk that you would just it would be like, well, you know what? 9 times out of 10, you may not make it. I don't think you're going to be on the air of, well, there's that 10% that we may make it. I mean, the odds are definitely not in your favor, and you're not going to follow through on that. So therefore, you're just like, no, I'm not going to get this done. So that's why it is so imperative to ensure that you stay consistent and you make sure that you never sacrifice your standards. Because if you sacrifice your standards, you're sacrificing certainty. And if there's one thing's for sure, that we want to ensure that we remain certain on our outcomes. So anyway, that is my podcast episode for this week. I'm very grateful for you guys. I'm very glad that you guys have tuned in. I know I dropped it a day late, got a whole bunch of things going on, but no excuses there. Just glad to bring this thing to you this week, and definitely hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I know it's Mother's Day weekend, so be sure to give all the ladies love out there this weekend, because without them, we don't have life. Y'all take care, Godspeed. I'm very grateful for you guys, and be the goat, never a sheep, and don't sleep on your dreams. Peace.